But the key tension in his life, of course, is the mind and the heart. Even when he was a teenager in Central Asia, during the day he would attend the majlis of Imam Al-Haramain Al-Juwayni, the greatest philosophical theologian in the world at the time, with the crack students of the age who'd come to sit at his feet from everywhere. And it was the forms of the syllogism, the construction of arguments, analogy, very refined, elaborate mental gymnastics, which have their place in our civilization. We like to construct good arguments. We've always emphasized logic. And then the classes were over by the Zuhr prayer, and he'd get on his donkey or his mule and trot off to the suburbs of the city in order to sit with a Sufi, Abu Ali al-Farmadi, where a different sort of journey was being celebrated. Not the way of the mind, but the way of the heart. Not the way of logic chopping and demonstration, apologetic proofs, but instead the affective, possibly that which is closer to what makes us most paradigmatically human. Taught in a rose garden. This is Persia, after all. It's mostly poetry. It's ecstatic. People are sitting in a circle, and as it were, the metaphorical flagons of love are being passed around. So you don't get that kind of intoxication in a logic class. It's dry, and it has to be dry. You have to exclude your humanity and your emotions from the rigorous intellectual construction of arguments in law and in metaphysics. But in Farmadi's gathering, it's the Sufi thing, and the Persian Sufi thing, which is the climax of that civilization, certainly in terms of its literature. And that bifurcation was, of course, on everybody's mind, and leads to his famous crisis: am I sincere? Why do I enjoy sitting in front of the best students in the Islamic world? Why am I accepting the patronage of Nizam al-Mulk, the most powerful man in the world, probably? Why am I hobnobbing, walking the corridors of power, taking the state's dinars, when, quite possibly, I'm just digging my own spiritual and moral grave? I really enjoy my professorial chair and the odium academicum that goes with it, and famously, in the middle of a lecture, he's kind of thunderstruck by this, experiences what we would probably call a breakdown, and just leaves, to the consternation of his students who want him to finish the argument, but he leaves. And he goes, well, not back to the rose garden, but God's rose garden, the wider world, which is where the believer finds his spiritual nourishment, because this is in the Quran. The Quran tells us that faith is gifted by heaven to those who humbly open their hearts to the signs of God in the natural world and in human beings. That's the Quran's argument. Argument from design, but not really philosophical, but rather existential, shaking us and saying, leave aside all of your clever syllogisms, look at all of this. Does it look as if it just emerged from some primordial nothing? Not very likely, is it? That's a kind of argument that's deeper than arguments. It appeals to that which is most commonsensical and real about human beings. And incidentally, it's another thing for us to think about in our world, part of whose ethos has been human mastery of nature. We want to control nature. We queue up to get to the top of Mount Everest at vast expense and personal